Jake Thompson stepped out of his car, the engine's hum fading into the eerie quiet of Willow Creek. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that danced across the empty streets of the village. As he grabbed his camera from the passenger seat, he couldn't shake the feeling that the place was somehow watching him. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness, and the quaint houses, with their peeling paint and overgrown gardens, seemed to hold their breath. He glanced around, taking in the sight of several villagers, their faces sunken and wary. They exchanged furtive glances, speaking in hushed tones, their eyes darting toward the dense forest that bordered the village like a dark wall. Jake felt an inexplicable pull toward that forest, a strange allure that stirred his curiosity. He took a deep breath, trying to shake off the unease that settled in his chest. As he wandered down the main street, he caught sight of an elderly woman sitting on a rickety porch, knitting slowly. Her deep-set eyes glinted with an unsettling mix of wisdom and sorrow. Jake approached her, hoping for a glimpse into the village's history. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said politely, raising his camera slightly as if to capture her essence. "I'm a photographer, and I'm here to document the beauty of this place. Can you tell me more about the forest?" The woman paused her knitting, her gaze turning somber. "The forest?" she echoed, her voice a mere whisper. "It's not a place for the living, young man. You should heed the warnings of the villagers." Jake frowned, intrigued. "Warnings? What do you mean?" She leaned closer, the faint scent of lavender and age wafting toward him. "Many have gone in, and few have returned. Spirits linger there, those who never found peace," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've seen things in those woods that would chill your blood." "Spirits?" Jake repeated, his curiosity piqued. "Are you talking about ghosts?" "Not just ghosts," she replied, shaking her head. "Memories of a massacre long ago. They haunt the trees, hungry for acknowledgement. You best be careful, boy. Nature has a way of revealing its secrets, but sometimes it's more than you can bear." Jake felt a shiver run down his spine, but he couldn't resist the pull of the forest. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, stepping back. "I'll be cautious." He offered her a smile, but she merely returned to her knitting, her eyes unfocused, as if staring through him. With a mix of trepidation and excitement, Jake set off toward the edge of the village. The trees loomed tall and foreboding, their gnarled branches twisted like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. The path narrowed, and soon he found himself enveloped in a thick canopy that dimmed the daylight. As he walked deeper into the forest, the silence grew oppressive. Even the birds seemed to hold their tongues, and an eerie calm settled around him. Each step felt heavier, as if the ground itself was reluctant to let him pass. He raised his camera, snapping pictures of the twisted roots and moss-covered stones, trying to capture the beauty that lay beneath the forest's eerie facade. "Just a few more shots," he murmured to himself, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. But the sensation persisted, creeping under his skin, making the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He glanced around, half expecting to see someone, or something, lurking among the trees. Suddenly he heard a rustling sound, followed by a soft whisper. Jake turned sharply, his heart racing. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing into the stillness. No response came, just the whisper of leaves swaying in an unseen breeze. Determined not to let fear deter him, he pressed on, feeling a strange urgency to uncover whatever secrets the forest held. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward him, urging him further into the depths of the woods. The thrill of discovery ignited his spirit, drowning out the warnings of the villagers and the cryptic words of the old woman. Just a little further, he promised himself, ignoring the unease swirling in his gut. The forest called to him, a siren song that he could not resist. And as he ventured deeper, he felt both a thrill and a dread that hinted at the darkness yet to come. As Jake Thompson stepped into the dense embrace of the forest, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Gone was the faint chatter of the village. Instead, a suffocating silence enveloped him, almost palpable in its intensity. Sunlight filtered through the thick canopy overhead, casting ethereal patterns on the forest floor, but the beauty felt overshadowed by an unsettling weight in the air. Jake paused, the hairs on the back of his neck prickling as he felt an instinctive urge to turn back. Yet, curiosity tugged at him, compelling him deeper into the woods. The ground beneath his feet was uneven, covered in a thick layer of moss and fallen leaves that muffled his footsteps. As he ventured further, the tall trees stood like silent sentinels, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal hands. "Just a little further," he muttered to himself, his voice barely a whisper against the oppressive quiet. After what felt like an eternity, he stumbled upon a clearing. In its center lay the remnants of an old campsite, long forgotten by time. The charred remains of a fire pit sat surrounded by scattered stones, and tattered remnants of what once might have been a tent fluttered weakly in the breeze. Drawn to a small, weathered journal lying half-buried in the dirt, Jake knelt to examine it. Its pages were frayed and yellowed, filled with frantic scrawls that told of terror and despair. "May 14th, 1972, he read aloud, his voice breaking the silence. "They are everywhere. We can hear them at night, whispering our names. The forest is angry. The spirits will not rest." A chill ran down his spine as he turned the pages, each entry more frantic than the last. "We must leave this place," one entry screamed, "but the forest won't let us go." Suddenly, a rustle in the underbrush startled Jake, causing him to snap the journal shut. He looked around, heart racing, convinced he was not alone. Just then, from the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of a shadow darting between the trees. It was quick, almost like smoke, but it sent a jolt of fear coursing through him. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing into the depths of the forest. No response came, only the whisper of the wind through the leaves. Feeling a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration, Jake decided to explore the area further. He approached the boundary of the clearing where the trees stood thickly, their trunks entwined with creeping vines. As he pushed through the underbrush, the air grew colder, and he could almost hear soft voices murmuring from beyond the trees. "Get out," they seemed to say, a warning laced with urgency. "Okay, this is getting weird," Jake muttered to himself, feeling a surge of adrenaline. He turned to leave the clearing, but hesitated, glancing back at the journal. "Maybe there's more to uncover," he whispered, his mind racing with the thrill of discovery. As he stepped deeper into the forest, he felt the weight of history pressing against him, an invisible force that seemed to pull him into its haunting past. Shadows danced at the edge of his vision, and he felt the prickle of unseen eyes watching his every move. The forest was alive with secrets, and he was determined to unveil them. But as he walked, the trees seemed to close in around him, their branches tangling overhead like fingers trapping him within their grasp. "I shouldn't be here," he said aloud, trying to shake off the growing sense of dread. "It's just a forest." Yet the stillness that surrounded him felt unnatural, as if the very essence of the woods was warning him to turn back. His heart raced, and he took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. "Just a few more minutes," he promised himself, his resolve hardening. "I'll take some photos, then head back." But as he ventured deeper, the shadows grew darker, and the whispers intensified, wrapping around him like a shroud. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into a story that had long been forgotten, one that was eager to reclaim its unwitting visitor. As Jake pressed deeper into the forest, the atmosphere grew heavier, thick with an unshakable sense of foreboding. The towering trees loomed above him like sentinels, their gnarled branches intertwining to form a dense canopy that blocked out the fading sunlight. Shadows danced menacingly at the corners of his vision, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. Jake's heart raced as he stumbled upon a decrepit cabin, half hidden by the underbrush. Its weathered wooden walls were cloaked in moss, and the roof sagged as if burdened by the weight of dark secrets. A shiver ran down his spine, but curiosity overpowered his instinct to flee. He approached the cabin cautiously, the sound of his footsteps muffled by the thick layer of fallen leaves. Pushing the creaking door open, a cloud of dust swirled around him. The interior was dimly lit, illuminated only by slivers of light that filtered through the gaps in the wooden walls. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of mildew and something more sinister. As he stepped inside, Jake felt an inexplicable pull toward a collection of strange artifacts scattered around the room. Old tools, tattered clothing, and what seemed to be remnants of ceremonial items. "What the hell is this place?" he muttered to himself, running his fingers over a dusty, carved totem that seemed to watch him with hollow eyes. His breath quickened as he felt a chill creep up his spine. Something about the totem felt alive, as if it were a conduit to the past. Jake picked up an old, frayed journal lying on a rickety table. Its pages were yellowed and brittle, filled with frantic scribbles that revealed a tragic history. "They're coming for us," one entry read. "The spirits of those we wronged. They won't let us forget." Each word seemed to echo in the stillness of the cabin, sending a wave of dread through Jake. Suddenly the air shifted, growing colder. He felt a presence enveloping him, and the room around him began to blur. The walls faded, and he found himself standing in a clearing, surrounded by figures clad in tattered clothing, their faces twisted in anguish. They were the villagers of Willow Creek, frozen in time, reliving their final moments. "Run!" a voice screamed from the shadows, and Jake turned to see a woman with hollow eyes, her mouth agape in a silent scream. The scene shifted again, and he was thrust into a nightmarish frenzy. Screams echoed, arrows flew, and blood soaked the ground beneath his feet. The villagers were being hunted, slaughtered like animals. "No, no!" Jake gasped, trying to shield his eyes from the horror unfolding before him. Yet he was helplessly drawn into the chaos, witnessing the massacre unfold in vivid detail. He saw the desperation on their faces, the betrayal of those who had once been their kin, and the merciless fury of their attackers. The visions were overwhelming, a torrent of grief and terror that threatened to drown him. "Leave this place," whispered a chorus of voices echoing around him, their tones filled with urgency and despair. "You must go before you become one of us." Jake stumbled back, his heart racing, the weight of their anguish pressing down on him. "I didn't mean to intrude," he shouted into the darkness, his voice trembling. "I'm just a photographer. I'm here to help." But the spirits only stared, their faces contorted in sorrow, as if mourning the loss of their own lives and the lives of those who would follow. The visions intensified, blurring the line between reality and nightmare. He could feel their pain, their rage, and their desperation seeping into his very bones. "Please! I'm not part of this!" Jake cried out, feeling the walls of the cabin closing in around him. He staggered backward, seeking an escape from the memories that threatened to consume him whole. As he turned to flee, the whispers grew louder, swirling around him like a tempest. "Leave now, before it's too late!" The urgency in their voices propelled him forward, and with a final glance at the haunting figures, Jake bolted out of the cabin, gasping for breath. He stumbled through the underbrush, the weight of the past heavy on his shoulders. The forest felt alive, pulsating with a dark energy that both repelled and beckoned him deeper into its embrace. He had to escape, but the memories of the massacre clung to him like a shroud, a reminder that he was now entwined in the tragic legacy of Willow Creek. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the village of Willow Creek, Jake Thompson felt a sense of urgency coursing through him. The weight of the villagers' silence pressed heavily on his chest, and he resolved to confront them about the forest and its secrets. He strode through the cobblestone streets, each step echoing with a tension that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He approached the local tavern, a quaint building with a weathered sign that creaked in the gentle breeze. Inside, a handful of patrons sat hunched over their drinks, their conversations hushed. Jake's presence drew wary glances, the kind that spoke volumes without a word. He spotted an older man nursing a tankard at the bar and took a seat beside him, hoping to pry loose some of the village's secrets. "Excuse me," Jake began, his voice steady despite the unease swirling around him. "I'm new here, and I've been exploring the forest. I'd like to know more about it. Why does everyone avoid it?" The man, his face etched with lines of worry, didn't meet Jake's gaze. Instead, he stared into his drink, as if it held the answers. "You should leave that place alone, boy. It doesn't take kindly to outsiders." Jake frowned, frustration creeping in. "But there must be a reason. I found a cabin in the woods and it felt significant. Can't you tell me what happened there?" At that, the man's expression shifted, a flicker of fear dancing in his eyes. "You should heed my warning. Those woods are cursed. Many have gone in and never returned. It's not just the trees that are haunted, it's the souls of those who were wronged." "Souls?" Jake's curiosity ignited further. "What do you mean?" Before the man could respond, a young woman entered the tavern, her presence like a breath of fresh air amid the stale atmosphere. Clara, with her auburn hair and sharp green eyes, glanced at Jake, her expression a mix of recognition and concern. She approached him, her voice low yet compelling. "You're the photographer who came to Willow Creek, aren't you?" "Yes," Jake replied, intrigued by her directness. "I'm Jake. I've been trying to learn about the village and the forest. Can you help me?" Clara hesitated, glancing back at the older man who shook his head disapprovingly. Then she turned back to Jake, her resolve strengthening. "I know about the forest and its history. My family has lived here for generations, and we've always been tied to that land. There's a curse, one that plagues my family, and it's connected to the spirits of the forest." "Cursed?" Jake echoed, leaning in closer. "What kind of curse?" "The spirits of my ancestors were betrayed and slaughtered," Clara explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "They were the original inhabitants of this land. The village made a pact to keep the spirits at bay, but it came at a terrible price. My family has been bound to protect the forest ever since." Jake's heart raced as he absorbed her words. "What do you mean protect? From what?" "From the wrath of those spirits," she said, her eyes darkening. "They demand retribution for the wrongs done to them, and if the balance isn't maintained, they'll come for us all. It's why the villagers are so fearful. They know what lurks in the shadows." "Then we need to do something," Jake urged, determination flooding his veins. "We can't just let this continue. I want to help. I need to understand what happened." Clara hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I've been meaning to go back to the cabin. There are things there, artifacts, that might shed light on our history. If you're willing to face the truth, I'll take you." "Tonight?" Jake asked, excitement and trepidation mingling in his chest. "Yes, but we must leave before the sun fully sets. The forest becomes more dangerous after dark." With a sense of purpose igniting their spirits, Jake and Clara stepped out of the tavern, the cool evening air wrapping around them. As they made their way toward the forest, the shadows deepened, and Jake felt the oppressive silence of the village behind them. They entered the woods, the trees towering like ancient sentinels, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. "Stay close," Clara instructed, her voice steady but laced with tension. "The forest can play tricks on your mind." Jake nodded, his heart pounding with anticipation and fear. As they ventured deeper, he could almost hear the whispers of the spirits, beckoning him to uncover the truth. He glanced at Clara, her expression resolute, and he felt an unspoken bond forming between them, a shared determination to face the darkness that lay ahead. As Jake and Clara stood in the shadowy cabin, the air grew thick with unease. They had just uncovered a tattered journal, and Clara's eyes darted nervously around the room, as if the walls themselves were listening. "Jake, we need to be careful," she whispered, her voice barely above a murmur. "This place feels alive." Jake nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I know what you mean. There's something here, something watching us." His pulse quickened as he recalled the chilling whispers he'd heard before. "Let's check that corner," he suggested, pointing toward a slightly ajar trapdoor hidden beneath a layer of dust. The edges of the door were frayed, and it seemed as though it hadn't been opened in years. Clara hesitated for a moment, biting her lip. "What if it's dangerous?" she asked, glancing back toward the entrance, as if expecting something to emerge from the darkness. "Anything is better than standing here in the open," Jake replied, determination edging his voice. He bent down and gripped the trapdoor's handle, pulling it upward with a creak that echoed ominously in the cabin. A damp, musty odor wafted up, sending a shiver down his spine. Together they peered into the darkness below. "It's just a cellar," Jake reassured, though the tremor in his voice betrayed his nerves. He took a deep breath, steeling himself against the unknown, and descended the rickety steps, Clara following closely behind. As they reached the bottom, their flashlight beams illuminated a chilling sight. The cellar was filled with remnants of a past long buried. Bones scattered across the cold earth, some still clad in tattered remnants of clothing. "Oh my God," Clara gasped, stepping back instinctively. Who are they?" Jake swallowed hard, his heart racing. "I think they're the ones from the journal," he said, his voice trembling. "The victims of the massacre." He stepped closer to a pile of bones, his mind racing as he tried to piece together the horror. "Clara, these people, they were sacrificed to appease the spirits of the forest." Clara's face turned pale, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It can't be," she whispered, backing away from the gruesome sight. "This is insane. Why would they do that?" "Fear," Jake replied, feeling the gravity of their discovery weigh heavily on him. "They believed that if they didn't offer someone, they'd face the wrath of the spirits. It's a cycle of terror, Clara." Suddenly, the air around them grew colder, and an eerie silence enveloped the cellar. Clara shivered. "I don't like this. We need to go back, now." But before Jake could respond, a gust of wind swept through the cellar, extinguishing their flashlights. Darkness consumed them, and Jake could hear Clara gasping beside him. "Jake!" she called out, panic rising in her voice. "What's happening?" "Stay close," he shouted, his own fear mingling with the urgent need to protect her. He felt around in the dark, trying to find her hand, but the shadows seemed to deepen, swallowing them whole. Then he felt Clara's arm brush against him. "I can't see anything," she cried, her voice filled with terror. In that moment, the shadows shifted, swirling around them like a living thing. Jake felt a sudden, powerful force tugging at Clara. "Jake, help me!" she screamed, her voice piercing through the darkness as she was pulled away from him. "No!" Jake shouted, reaching out desperately. His fingers grazed her arm, but the darkness was relentless. "Clara, hold on!" But the shadows tightened their grip around her, dragging her into the abyss. With a final, agonizing shriek, she vanished from his grasp. "Clara!" Jake bellowed, his heart pounding in his chest as he stumbled forward, blinded by fear and the oppressive darkness. He took a deep breath, fighting against the rising panic. He had to find her. "Clara!" he shouted again, his voice echoing through the cellar as he bolted back toward the stairs. The forest was conspiring against him. He could feel it, every twisted branch and rustling leaf urging him deeper into its haunted embrace. With each frantic step, he pushed through the darkness, determined to save Clara from whatever horrors lay within the depths of the forest. Time was running out, and he could sense the spirits growing restless, their whispers filling the air around him. He had to escape the clutches of the woods before it claimed him too. The air in the heart of the forest was thick with an oppressive silence, broken only by the faint rustling of leaves. Jake Thompson stepped cautiously, his heart racing as he called out, "Clara, where are you?" The haunting echoes of his voice seemed to mock him, fading into the shadows that enveloped the towering trees. He had already lost her once, and the thought of failing to bring her back sent a shiver down his spine. The forest felt alive. Each creak and whisper grew louder, more insistent. The deeper he ventured, the more the ground beneath his feet felt unstable, as if the earth itself was shifting to keep him contained within its grasp. Jake recalled Clara's laughter, her warmth, everything that made her real. But now, as he stood alone, he could only hear the relentless whispers of the spirits that roamed these woods. "Clara!" he shouted again, desperation lacing his voice. But instead of an answer, he was met with a chilling breeze that seemed to carry faint cries, distant yet piercing. "I have to find her," he muttered to himself, pushing through the underbrush. The further he went, the more vivid the memories of their journey flooded his mind. The moment they discovered the cabin, the trapdoor, the chilling revelation of the massacre. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught his eye. Jake turned sharply, and there she was, Clara, or rather her ethereal form, shimmering with an otherworldly glow. "Clara!" He rushed toward her, but just as he reached out, she faded, leaving behind a whisper that chilled him to the bone. "Jake, you mustn't stay." His heart pounded as he stumbled back, confusion and fear washing over him. The shadows shifted like wraiths, swirling around him, and Jake felt an overwhelming sense of dread. "What do you want from me?" he shouted into the darkness, his voice trembling. "You seek her. a voice echoed from the trees, deep and resonant. "But she is bound to the land, a guardian of its cursed history. The villagers sacrificed her to keep us at bay." Jake staggered back, the weight of the revelation crashing down upon him. "No, it can't be true." His breath quickened as the realization sank in. Clara was sacrificed. They betrayed her. Anguish twisted in his chest, and he sank to his knees. Why would they do such a thing? Fear drives them, the voice continued, echoing from the shadows. They believe that sacrificing one will appease the spirits of those lost. But it is a lie. Clara's spirit protects this place. Jake's heart raced as he processed the implications. If she's a guardian, then what does that make me? A prisoner of this forest? A flicker of anger ignited within him. I won't let them take her from me. As if sensing his resolve, the spirits began to swirl around him, faces emerging from the darkness, twisted expressions of joy and sorrow. You must choose, they intoned in unison. Her freedom or your own. No! Jake screamed, the desperation clawing at his throat. I can't leave her. Clara, I love you. His voice cracked, echoing through the trees, but there was only silence in response. The forest seemed to close in around him, branches reaching out like skeletal hands, pulling him deeper into its embrace. The ground trembled, and shadows loomed larger, whispering secrets he was not meant to hear. Join us, Jake. Become one with the land. Embrace the darkness. Jake shook his head, tears streaming down his face. I won't. I refuse to be a part of this tragedy. He could feel the weight of Clara's spirit, tethered to the land, and the thought of her eternal suffering tore at his heart. In that moment of clarity, he realized the choice he had to make. If I must choose, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of the forest, I'll choose her. The woods erupted in a chaotic swirl of energy, the spirits howling in protest. Jake felt the ground shift beneath him, and he reached out desperately, calling for Clara one last time. I'll find a way to free you, I promise. But as the darkness closed around him, the last thing he saw was the faint glimmer of Clara's form, her eyes filled with sorrow and love. The forest claimed him as a prisoner, forever entwined in its tragic history, haunted by the echoes of Willow Creek. In the depths of the woods, the cycle of sacrifice continued, and Jake Thompson became another lost spirit, destined to wander the shadows, forever searching for the one he loved. The night air in Briarwood was thick with an unsettling quiet as Emily Carter and her husband Michael unloaded the last of their belongings from the moving truck. The village, nestled among dense woods and rolling hills, felt like a world apart from the bustling city they had left behind. Here, the streetlights cast a soft glow on cobblestone paths, their warm light struggling to pierce the shadows that lingered just beyond the edges. Can you believe we're finally here? Emily said, her voice a mixture of excitement and apprehension as she surveyed their new home, a quaint cottage with ivy crawling up its brick walls. Michael chuckled, though the sound was tinged with uncertainty. Yeah, it's different, but in a good way, right? He paused, looking down the street where the last of the daylight faded into dusk. It's a bit eerie, though. Where is everyone? Emily shrugged, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. They're probably just settling in for the night. It is a small village. As they moved inside, the creaky floorboards whispered secrets of the past, and Emily's heart raced with anticipation. They began unpacking, the air thick with the scent of old wood and fresh paint. It was a fresh start, she told herself, an opportunity to leave behind the chaos of city life and embrace a simpler existence. Let's find the bedroom first, Michael suggested, his hands already digging through boxes. After we set up the bed, we can tackle the kitchen. Good idea, Emily replied, her eyes scanning the clutter. In the corner of the living room, a stack of dusty boxes caught her attention. Among them, she found an old newspaper clipping, yellowed and brittle. Curiosity piqued. She carefully unfolded it. Michael, come here, she called, her voice echoing in the stillness. Michael joined her, peering over her shoulder at the brittle paper. The headline read, Mysterious Disappearance in Briarwood. Town Left in Shock. What does it say? He asked, frowning as he read the details of a young woman who had vanished without a trace over a century ago. The article spoke of frantic searches and whispered rumors, the villagers' fear palpable even through the ink. "Look at this," Emily pointed to a sketch of the woman, her face eerily beautiful yet haunting. "It's like something out of a ghost story. I wonder what happened to her." "Probably just a tragic tale," Michael said, folding the paper again. "Let's not get too caught up in village legends tonight. We've got enough to do." As the hours slipped by, the couple finally settled into their new home, exhaustion creeping in. They lay together in bed, the house enveloped in a heavy silence. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, a soft whispering that felt oddly alive. Emily closed her eyes, but sleep eluded her. Suddenly, the clock in the living room chimed midnight. The sound echoed through the house, loud and clear, yet an uncanny stillness followed, as if the world had paused. "What was that?" Michael mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. "I think it was just the clock," Emily replied, but her heart raced. A chill ran down her spine as she realized that the ticking had stopped. She glanced at the clock on the nightstand, its hands frozen at 12. "Emily, are you okay?" Michael asked, sensing her unease. "I'm fine. Just strange, isn't it? The clock just stopped," she said, her brow furrowing as she swung her legs over the side of the bed. "I'll go check the others." As she moved through the darkened house, she noticed that every clock was silent, each one frozen in time. The eerie quiet was palpable, a weight pressing against her chest. Shadows danced along the walls, and she felt as if a pair of unseen eyes were watching her. "Michael?" she called softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Come here." He joined her in the dim light of the living room, his expression shifting from sleepiness to concern. "What's wrong?" "Look," she motioned toward the clocks, her voice trembling. "They all stopped, at midnight." Michael frowned, glancing at the windows, where darkness loomed thick and impenetrable. "It's just a coincidence, right? Maybe they're all broken. Or maybe it's something more," she murmured, feeling a shiver run down her spine. The village held secrets, and deep down, Emily sensed they were only beginning to scratch the surface. Outside, the wind howled, and a soft whisper filled the air, sending a wave of apprehension crashing over them. As they stood together in the darkness, the feeling of being watched intensified, and Emily's heart raced. Something was amiss in Briarwood, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they had stepped into a story far darker than they had anticipated. Emily awoke to the soft light filtering through the lace curtains of their new home, the quaint cottage they had lovingly chosen in Briarwood. It was a stark contrast to the cacophony of the city, yet the silence here had an unsettling quality. She glanced at the clock on the bedside table, its hands frozen at midnight. A chill ran down her spine as she recalled the night's eerie events, the whispers, the shadows. "Michael, wake up," she called softly, nudging her husband who lay still, lost in slumber. "Hmm?" He groaned, rolling over, his eyes still heavy with sleep. "Did you hear that bell last night?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael rubbed his eyes, frowning as the memory slowly returned. "I did. It was strange. But we're in a small village, Em. Maybe it's just a local tradition?" "Maybe," Emily conceded, though a nagging feeling lingered in her mind. She couldn't shake the sensation that Briarwood held secrets, and she was determined to uncover them. "I'm going to explore the village today. You should join me." He chuckled, sitting up. "You know, I'd rather tackle unpacking than socialize with the locals. They seem a bit reserved." "Reserved or not, I want to know why those clocks stop," she insisted, her curiosity piqued. "I'll be careful, I promise." After breakfast, Emily set out on her own, a small notebook in hand to jot down her observations. The village had an eerie beauty, with its cobblestone streets and ivy-clad cottages, but the air felt thick with unspoken fears. As she wandered, she noticed the villagers watching her from behind their doors and windows, exchanging furtive glances whenever she passed. "Good morning," Emily called out cheerfully to an elderly woman sweeping her porch. The woman paused, her eyes widening momentarily before she resumed her task, ignoring Emily's greeting. Undeterred, Emily made her way to the village library, a charming building that appeared to have withstood the test of time. The air inside was musty, filled with the scent of old pages and wood polish. She approached the librarian, a stooped figure with spectacles perched precariously on her nose. "Excuse me," Emily began. "I'm looking for information on Briarwood's history, particularly anything unusual." The librarian glanced up, her expression turning wary. "Unusual? You'd best be careful with what you seek, dear." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. "I just want to learn more about the village." With a reluctant sigh, the librarian led Emily to a dusty section in the back, filled with ancient tomes. "This might help," she said, pulling down a large, leather-bound book. The spine cracked as she opened it, revealing pages filled with faded text and illustrations. Emily's heart raced as she scanned the words. The book detailed a dark past, a ritual performed in the 19th century, a curse that had befallen the village, requiring a sacrifice every generation. "My God," she murmured, her breath catching in her throat. "What have we stumbled into?" As she read on, a chill swept through the library. The sun outside dipped behind dark clouds, casting long shadows across the room. Emily shivered and closed the book, her mind racing with possibilities. She needed to discuss this with Michael. Later that evening, as night enveloped the village, Emily returned home. She found Michael in the living room, fiddling with a box of kitchen utensils. "You won't believe what I found," she exclaimed, her voice tinged with urgency. "What is it?" he asked, setting down a spatula. "I went to the library and discovered this book about Briarwood's history. It talks about a curse, a ritual that demands a sacrifice. I think it's why the clocks stop at midnight." Michael frowned, concern etched on his face. "Emily, that sounds like folklore. You can't seriously believe it." "But what if it's true?" she pressed, her eyes wide. "What if we're in danger?" "Let's not jump to conclusions. We just need to settle in and figure things out," he replied, trying to reassure her. That night, as they prepared for bed, the ominous tolling of a bell echoed through the air, resonating with a haunting finality. Emily's heart raced as she and Michael exchanged anxious glances. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I did," he replied, his brow furrowed. "It sounded like 12 chimes." They hurried to the window, peering out into the darkness. The streets lay silent save for the rustling of leaves. But then they saw it, shadowy figures standing at the edge of their yard, watching them with hollow eyes. "Michael, who are they?" Emily breathed, fear creeping into her voice. "I don't know," he replied, his grip tightening around her waist. "But we need to stay inside." As the clock struck midnight, every clock in the house fell silent, leaving only the echo of the bell lingering in the air. The figures remained, still as statues, shrouded in the night's embrace, and Emily felt a sense of dread settle over her like a cold blanket. She knew deep down that their new life in Briarwood was about to take a turn into darkness, and she had to uncover the truth before it was too late. Emily stood in the dim light of the living room, the air heavy with a sense of foreboding. The old newspaper clipping lay spread out on the coffee table before her, its yellowed edges curling slightly as if trying to escape the dark story it told. The headline screamed of a disappearance, a young girl named Clara who vanished without a trace over a century ago. As she read the article again, her heart raced with a mixture of curiosity and dread. "Emily, are you sure you want to keep digging into this?" Michael's voice broke through her thoughts, laced with concern. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, his brow furrowed. "You've spent hours on this already. Maybe it's time to take a break?" "No, Michael," she replied, her voice firm but tinged with a hint of exhaustion. "There's something about this place, something that feels unfinished. I need to understand what happened to Clara. It might be linked to what's going on with the clocks." Michael sighed, stepping into the room and placing his hand on her shoulder. "I get that. But what if you find something that's better left buried? This village, it's different. The people are different. I just don't want you to get hurt." Emily shook her head, brushing his hand away gently. "I appreciate your concern, but I feel like I'm on the brink of discovering something important. I can't just walk away." With each passing hour, her obsession deepened. The haunting whispers of the night echoed in her mind, and she felt as though the village itself was beckoning her to uncover its secrets. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she found herself rummaging through the attic, a place filled with dusty boxes and forgotten memories. Among the clutter, she stumbled upon an old leather-bound diary, its cover cracked with age. "Michael, come here," she called, her voice echoing through the stillness of the house. He appeared at the top of the stairs, curiosity piqued. "What did you find?" he asked, stepping closer as she opened the diary. The pages were filled with elegant, looping cursive, written by a woman named Eliza, who had lived in Briarwood during the 19th century. As Emily read aloud, her voice trembled with excitement. She wrote about a ritual that took place every generation, sacrifices made to appease a dark entity. "It's all here, Michael. Eliza escaped, but she spoke of others who were not so fortunate. They were bound to the village, just like Clara." "What does that mean?" Michael asked, his eyes widening with concern. "Are you saying we might be next?" "I don't know," Emily admitted, her heart racing, "but we need to understand the full story. If we can find out how Eliza escaped, maybe we can save ourselves." Suddenly, a frantic knock echoed through the stillness, jolting them both from their reverie. Emily exchanged a glance with Michael, a shared look of unease. She hurried to the door, her heart pounding, and flung it open. Standing there was a villager, his face pale and eyes wide with fear. "You have to leave, before sunrise," he gasped, breathless. "The curse, it's coming for you." "What do you mean?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've awakened something," the villager warned, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting shadows to creep closer. "You must go now. The clocks, they're not just stopping, they're counting down to something worse than you can imagine." Michael stepped forward, protective instincts kicking in. "Who are you? What do you know about this curse?" The villager shook his head, desperation etched into every line of his face. "I can't explain everything. You have to trust me, or you'll become part of the sacrifice like the others." Emily felt a chill run down her spine, the weight of the diary in her hands, suddenly feeling like a heavy, cursed object. "We need time," she said, trying to reason with the villager. "We're not leaving until we learn more." "No, you don't understand," he shouted, panic breaking through his fear. "You don't have time. If you stay, you'll be trapped, just like Clara." As the urgency of the situation settled over them, Emily's resolve wavered. The darkness outside seemed to pulse with malevolence, and the village's eerie silence loomed over them like a heavy shroud. She turned back to Michael, who looked torn between his desire to protect her and the growing dread of what might come. "Emily, we should go," he urged quietly, his voice filled with a mix of fear and determination. "We have to protect ourselves." But Emily felt the pull of the past, the weight of the village's history pressing down on her like an anchor. She looked back at the villager, who was still waiting, eyes darting nervously toward the encroaching night. "I can't just run away," she whispered, her heart pounding. "Not when I'm so close to finding the truth." As the moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over Briarwood, Emily stood resolute in front of the town hall. The imposing structure loomed before her, its weathered stones whispering secrets of a long-forgotten past. She could feel the weight of the villagers' fearful gazes on her back. But she had no intention of backing down. Michael, standing a few paces behind her, wore a look of concern, his brow furrowed with worry. "Are you sure about this, Em?" he asked, his voice low and cautious. "The villagers are scared for a reason. Maybe we should just leave it alone." Emily turned to him, her determination unwavering. "I can't just ignore it, Michael. They're hiding something, and I need to know what it is. If I don't confront the mayor, we might end up as the next sacrifices." With one last glance at her husband, she strode up the steps and pushed open the heavy wooden door. Inside, the air was thick with a musty odor, the low light casting long shadows that danced ominously on the walls. The mayor's office was at the end of a dimly lit corridor, and Emily felt her heart race as she approached. When she entered, Mayor Thompson sat behind an enormous oak desk, his face obscured by the shadows. He looked up with a weary expression, as if he had expected her, and gestured for her to sit. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice smooth but edged with an undercurrent of something dark, "what brings you here at such an hour?" "I want to know about the curse," Emily replied, her voice steady despite the tremor of fear in her gut. I've heard the whispers, seen the fear in the villagers' eyes. You can't keep it from me any longer." The mayor leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepling under his chin. "Some things are better left buried, my dear. You must understand that the past has a way of haunting those who pry too deeply." "Haunting," Emily echoed, her intensity growing. "You mean to say that we should just accept our fate? I refuse to believe that. There has to be a way to break it." "Accepting one's fate is not a sign of weakness, but of wisdom," he replied cryptically, the corners of his mouth twitching into a faint, knowing smile. "You may find that fighting against the tide will only lead to your own despair." "Despair?" Michael interrupted, stepping forward. "What do you mean by that? Are you saying we should just sit back and wait to be sacrificed like the others?" The mayor's expression darkened for a moment. "You do not understand the power of the forces at play here. The villagers are bound by a pact, one that has kept them safe, albeit at a great cost. You are not the first to come here, and you certainly will not be the last." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean?" "Those who come seeking to break the curse often find themselves tangled in its web," he said, his tone almost pitying. "I would advise you to leave Briarwood while you still can." As the mayor leaned back, a flicker of fear ignited within Emily. "We won't leave, not until we uncover the truth." With that, she turned on her heel and walked out of the office, her heart pounding. Michael followed closely, his expression a mixture of admiration and anxiety. "Emily, this isn't safe. We need to think this through," he urged as they stepped back into the cool night air. "I can't just stand by and let it happen, Michael. I found a ritual in the diary, one that might help us communicate with the spirit of the woman who escaped the curse," she explained, her eyes lighting up with determination. "That's a dangerous path," he warned, but she could hear the wavering in his voice. "What if it goes wrong?" "Then at least we'll know we tried," she replied, her resolve firm. "We have to gather the items listed in the ritual. It's our only chance." As they made their way back home, the shadows seemed to deepen around them. The air was heavy with tension, and the silence was punctuated only by the distant sound of the clock tower chiming midnight. Emily felt a sense of urgency claw at her insides. They had to act fast. Later that evening, Emily gathered the necessary items: a candle, a mirror, and a piece of cloth she had found in the attic. Michael watched her with a mix of concern and admiration as she set up the small ritual space in their living room. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked softly, watching as she lit the candle, its flame flickering against the darkness. "I have to," she insisted, determination etched on her face. "It's the only way to find out what really happened here." As the candle's light danced in the dim room, Emily closed her eyes and began to chant the words she had memorized from the diary. The air thickened around them, and she felt the temperature drop as a whispering breeze swirled through the room. "Emily?" Michael's voice trembled, but she pressed on, her heart racing with a mix of fear and hope. Suddenly the room was filled with a cacophony of voices, echoes of the past crashing into their present. Emily's vision blurred, and she was drawn into a whirlwind of images, figures in dark cloaks, a circle of fire, and a woman's face twisted in terror. "Michael," she gasped, feeling the ground shift beneath her, the chaos of the ritual pulling her deeper into the darkness. As she trembled on the edge of a revelation, the chilling reality of Briarwood's past began to unveil itself, and Emily realized that understanding the curse might come at a price she was not prepared to pay. Emily stood at the edge of the forest, the air thick with tension and the weight of her visions pressing down on her. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows that danced between the trees, whispering secrets of the past. "Michael, this has to be it," she murmured, glancing back at her husband, who stood a few paces behind her, his expression a mix of concern and determination. "Are you sure about this, Em?" Michael replied, his voice laced with worry. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit that had grown more frequent since their arrival in Briarwood. "What if we're walking into a trap?" She turned to face him, her heart racing. "I can't shake the feeling that everything we need to know is in that cave. The visions, they're not just random, they're guiding us." Her eyes darkened with resolve. "We have to face it together." Michael took a deep breath, the chill of the evening air biting at his skin. Okay, but we need to be careful. If the villagers are involved? His voice trailed off, the unspoken fear hanging between them like a specter. We'll be careful, Emily promised, reaching out to squeeze his hand. But we can't let fear dictate our actions. We need to break this curse. As they approached the cave's entrance, the ground beneath them became uneven, the air growing colder with each step. The cave loomed ahead, its mouth gaping like a dark wound in the earth, the shadows coiling around them like hungry serpents. What if we're the next sacrifice? Michael whispered, his voice barely above a breath. Emily swallowed hard but held her ground. Then we'll make sure it doesn't happen. We'll find a way to stop it. With a final squeeze of his hand, she stepped into the darkness, Michael following closely behind. Inside, the cave was damp and silent. The only sound, the echo of their footsteps against the stone. The walls glistened with moisture, and Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. She could almost hear the whispers of the past, the voices of those who had come before them. "Do you feel that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What?" Michael replied, his gaze darting around the cavern. "It's like the air is charged with something. It feels alive," she said, her senses heightened. "Maybe it's just the atmosphere," he suggested, though he sounded uncertain. They continued deeper into the cave, the light from their flashlights dancing against the walls. Suddenly, Emily stopped, her heart pounding in her chest. "This is it," she said, pointing to a crude altar carved into the stone. It was stained dark, as if remnants of past offerings still clung to its surface. Michael stepped closer, his face pale. "What is this place?" "I think it's where the sacrifices were made," Emily replied, her voice trembling. "The last couple. What if they tried to escape just like us?" As if summoned by her words, the air shifted, becoming heavier. A low growl echoed through the cave, sending a chill down their spines. They turned to see the silhouettes of villagers emerging from the shadows, their faces masked with grim determination. "You shouldn't have come here," one of them said, stepping forward. It was the same frantic villager who had warned them to leave before sunrise. "You'll bring doom upon us all." "Doom!" Michael echoed, stepping protectively in front of Emily. "We're trying to save ourselves and you. This curse, it binds us all," another villager interrupted, his eyes wild with fear. "You cannot leave, nor can you break it. The entity demands a sacrifice every generation, and you are that sacrifice." Emily's heart raced as she exchanged a glance with Michael. "We won't be part of this. We'll find a way to break the cycle," she shouted, her voice filled with defiance. "Foolish girl," the first villager sneered. "You think you can defy it? You're already too late. The clock strikes midnight soon, and the entity will claim what is owed." Michael took a step back, fear evident on his face. "What do we do, Emily?" he asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "We fight," Emily replied, her determination solidifying. "We have to confront whatever this entity is. We can't let them dictate our fate." But just as she finished speaking, the ground trembled beneath them, a deep rumble that echoed through the cave. The villagers' faces contorted in horror, and Emily knew they were running out of time. The shadows thickened, and she felt the pull of the darkness beckoning her closer to the altar. "Together, Michael," she said, gripping his hand tightly. "We can't let them win." As the villagers advanced, their faces twisted in fear and anger. Emily and Michael steeled themselves for the unknown, knowing that they were standing on the brink of a confrontation that would determine their fate, and perhaps the fate of Briarwood itself. The air inside the cave was thick with tension and the scent of damp earth, a stark contrast to the stifled atmosphere of Briarwood above. Shadows danced along the rocky walls, illuminated only by the flickering light of the lantern Emily had brought, casting eerie shapes that seemed to mock their plight. As they ventured deeper, the oppressive silence was punctuated only by the distant sound of dripping water and the occasional echo of their footsteps. Emily's heart raced as they approached a wide cavern, its walls adorned with ancient markings that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. She felt an inexplicable pull toward the center of the cave, where a faint glow emanated from a stone altar, partially obscured by the shadows. "Michael, look at this," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Michael stepped closer, his expression a mix of curiosity and dread. "What do you think it is?" he asked, his voice low as if afraid to disturb the air thick with history. "I don't know, but it feels important," Emily replied. As she reached out to touch the stone, a sudden chill enveloped her, and she staggered back, gasping. In that moment, a vision flooded her mind. Images of a woman who looked strikingly like her, performing a dark ritual surrounded by the villagers, their faces twisted in fear and desperation. "Emily, are you all right?" Michael's voice broke through her daze, and she blinked rapidly to clear her mind. I saw something. I think I saw her. The one who escaped," Emily stammered, her breath coming in quick bursts. She's tied to this place, just like we are." As she spoke, the glow from the altar intensified, illuminating the cave with a ghostly light. The markings on the walls seemed to shift, revealing more images of the past, a cycle of horror and sacrifice that had plagued the village for generations. "This is where it all began, Michael. We need to break the cycle." "But how?" he asked, desperation creeping into his tone. "What do we do?" "I don't know yet," Emily admitted, her voice trembling. "But we need to find a way to confront whatever's binding us here." Just then, the air grew colder, and a whisper echoed through the cavern, a voice both familiar and alien. "Emily!" it called, sending chills down her spine. She turned slowly, her heart racing as she faced an apparition that mirrored her own features. Yet the eyes were dark and hollow, filled with a timeless sorrow. "Who are you?" Emily demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. "I am you," the entity replied, its voice a haunting melody. "Bound by the curse, just as you will be if you do not act." Michael stepped back, uncertainty flooding his face as he glanced between Emily and the apparition. "This is insane. We have to leave." "No," Emily insisted, her mind racing. "I need to understand. You're the one who escaped, aren't you? You know how to break this." "Yes," the entity said, its form flickering like a flame. "But it comes at a price. To free the village, one must take the place of the sacrifice." Emily's heart sank as she processed the implications. "You mean I would have to, or your beloved?" the apparition interrupted, its gaze piercing through Emily's resolve. "The choice is yours." "No, I can't let that happen," Michael interjected, panic rising in his voice. "We'll find another way." "It's not just our lives at stake, Michael," Emily shouted, her eyes filling with tears. "The curse demands a sacrifice every generation. If I don't do this, we'll be trapped here forever, and who knows how many others will suffer." The clock outside told midnight, the sound reverberating through the cave like a death knell. With each chime, Emily felt the weight of the decision pressing down. "I can't let you pay this price," she whispered, her heart breaking as she looked at Michael. "Emily, please," he pleaded, his voice thick with emotion. "We'll figure it out together. I can't lose you." But as she gazed into his eyes, filled with love and fear, she knew what she had to do. "I love you, Michael, more than anything, but this is the only way." With the determination born of desperation, Emily stepped toward the entity, her resolve solidifying. "I'll take her place, break the curse." As the apparition smiled, a wave of energy engulfed Emily, pulling her into its embrace. The last thing she saw was Michael's face, twisted in horror and disbelief, before darkness enveloped her. "Emily!" His voice echoed in her mind, fading into silence as she surrendered to the curse, leaving behind a love that would haunt him for all eternity. Mark Evans leaned back in his seat, gazing out the window of the old minivan as it rumbled along the narrow winding road that led to Raven's End. Beside him, Sarah scrolled through her phone, her eyes darting from the screen to the eerie landscape outside. Jake sat in the front passenger seat, his fingers tapping nervously against the dashboard, while Lily, with her curly hair bouncing as she shifted in her seat, chatted animatedly about the weekend ahead. "Can you believe we're finally doing this?" Lily exclaimed, her voice a mix of excitement and trepidation. "Raven's End, the home of ghost stories and urban legends." "Yeah, legends that usually end with someone disappearing," Jake muttered, a hint of sarcasm lacing his words. "Great idea, Mark. What were you thinking?" Mark chuckled, shrugging off Jake's comment. "Come on, it'll be fun. We'll explore, take some pictures, maybe even find something spooky. Besides, we need a break from all that studying." He gestured broadly, trying to convey the allure of adventure as they passed a dilapidated sign welcoming them to the village. As they entered Raven's End, the atmosphere changed drastically. The quaint charm of the village was overshadowed by a heavy, almost oppressive silence. Houses stood like sentinels, their windows dark and uninviting, while the few townsfolk they encountered cast wary glances at the newcomers. Mark felt a shiver run down his spine, but brushed it off as mere excitement. "Look at that!" Sarah pointed at an old cabin in the distance. Its wooden beams were weathered, and the roof sagged under the weight of years. "Let's check it out." "Are you sure that's a good idea?" Jake hesitated, glancing at the cabin. "It looks like it could collapse at any moment." "Oh, come on, Jake. What's the worst that could happen?" Lily teased, her eyes sparkling with mischief. They made their way toward the cabin, the crunch of leaves underfoot echoing in the stillness. As they stepped inside, a musty smell enveloped them, and dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight that pierced through the broken windows. The interior was filled with forgotten relics of the past, old furniture, tattered books, and remnants of lives once lived. Mark's eyes were drawn to a corner where a large, ornate frame leaned against the wall, its glass cracked and foggy. He approached it cautiously, wiping away the dust with his sleeve. When the surface cleared, he gasped. Inside the frame was a photograph of a group of faceless individuals, their bodies rendered in shadowy outlines against a backdrop of trees. "Guys, come look at this," Mark called, his voice a mix of awe and unease. "What the heck is that?" Jake said, peering over Mark's shoulder. "Why are they all faceless?" "They look like they're from another time," Sarah added, a frown creasing her brow. "What does this even mean?" "I don't know," Mark replied, his heart racing. "But it's kind of creepy, right? We should take it with us." As they gathered around the photograph, an inexplicable chill swept through the cabin, causing Mark to shudder. He felt a strange connection to the image, an urge to uncover its secrets. "Maybe we should head back," Jake suggested nervously, glancing around as if expecting something to emerge from the shadows. "This place gives me the creeps." "Just a few more minutes," Mark insisted, his gaze still fixed on the photograph. "I want to find out who they were." That night, the friends settled into their rented house, the unease from the cabin lingering in the air. As darkness fell, strange sounds began to echo through the walls, a creaking that seemed to come from nowhere, a whisper that floated just beyond the edge of hearing. "Did you hear that?" Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she clutched a pillow to her chest. "Yeah, it's probably just the house settling," Jake replied, though he sounded less convinced than he wanted to. Mark sat on the edge of the couch, the photograph resting on the coffee table before him. "We should probably leave that thing in the car," he said, anxiety creeping into his voice. "No way, we're not leaving it behind," Sarah countered, her eyes wide with determination. "There's something about it. We need to figure this out." As the night deepened, the strange noises grew louder, wrapping around them like a shroud. Mark felt a knot of fear tightening in his stomach, the photograph's chilling presence haunting him. With every creak, every whisper, he could not shake the feeling that they had awakened something dark in Raven's End, something that would soon come for them. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the village of Raven's End, Mark felt a surge of determination. He couldn't shake off the haunting image of the faceless group from the photograph. It felt as if the weight of their unspoken story pressed down on him, and he was resolved to uncover its secrets. The village, with its twisted alleys and crumbling facades, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for him to dig deeper. "Let's split up and talk to some of the locals," Mark suggested, his voice steady. Sarah nodded, her eyes wide with a mix of excitement and trepidation. "I'll go with you," she said. Jake and Lily exchanged glances, both hesitant but intrigued by the idea. "Just be careful," Jake warned. "You never know what you might uncover in a place like this." With that, the group set off in different directions, the chill of the evening air wrapping around them like a shroud. Mark and Sarah approached an elderly woman sitting on a rickety porch, her gnarled hands knitting a faded woolen scarf. She looked up, her eyes narrowing as she spotted the two young visitors. "What do you want?" she croaked, suspicion lacing her voice. "We're trying to learn more about the village and this photograph," Mark replied, pulling out the old image from his pocket. The woman's gaze flickered to the photograph, and a shiver ran down her spine. "Ah, I see you found that cursed thing," she muttered, her knitting momentarily forgotten. "Many have tried to understand it, but it's better left alone." "Why is it cursed?" Sarah pressed, her curiosity piqued. The woman hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if fearing someone might overhear. "They were a group of friends just like you. They vanished, one by one, swallowed by the darkness that lurks here. The photograph, it's a warning, not just a memory." Mark felt a chill creep up his spine. What happened to them? Why did they disappear? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The old woman's eyes darkened. They sought the truth. They thought they could break the curse, but they didn't understand. Those faceless figures, they were once like you, but they became part of the shadows. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. Beware. The photograph doesn't just capture faces, it captures souls. As they left the woman's porch, Mark's heart raced with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "It's like we're walking in their footsteps." Sarah nodded, her brow furrowed. "We need to be careful. This isn't just a story, it's real." They continued their quest, seeking out more villagers, each encounter deepening the mystery. An old man in the tavern spoke of whispers in the night, while a middle-aged woman recounted tales of shadows creeping through the village streets. Later that night, as the friends gathered in their rented house, a thick tension filled the air. "Did you find anything useful?" Jake asked, his voice laced with anxiety. Mark recounted the chilling stories, each word drawing the group further into the web of fear. They all mentioned the same thing. The photograph is tied to a curse, and those who look into it are never the same, he said, his eyes flickering with a manic light. "Maybe we should just leave," Lily suggested, biting her lip. "This is starting to feel too real." But Mark shook his head, a fierce determination in his gaze. "We can't leave yet. We need to know what happened. There's a reason we're here, and I can't just walk away from it." As the clock ticked closer to midnight, the friends settled down for the night, but sleep eluded them. Each of them found themselves drifting into restless dreams. Mark tossed and turned, visions of faceless figures dancing in the corners of his mind. They beckoned him, drawing him into a foggy abyss where the whispers of the past echoed around him. Suddenly, he awoke with a start, gasping for breath as the remnants of his nightmare clung to him. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, glancing around the dimly lit room. The others stirred, their faces pale and drawn. "It sounded like whispers," Sarah murmured, her voice thick with sleep and fear. "I thought I was imagining it." Mark exchanged worried glances with his friends, the weight of their shared dread settling heavily around them. They had delved too deep into the secrets of Raven's End, and as the night wore on, the feeling of being watched crept closer, an unseen force lurking just beyond the veil of their reality. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets of Raven's End. Mark, Sarah, Jake, and Lily stood outside the village archives, a hulking structure covered in ivy and decay. The air was thick with moisture, and the distant rumble of thunder hinted at the impending storm. "Are you sure we should be doing this?" Jake asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "I mean, what if the stories are true?" Mark shot him an impatient glance. "We need to find out more about the photograph. This isn't just some ghost story, Jake. People vanished. We can't turn back now." Reluctantly, the group followed Mark inside. The musty smell of old paper and dust greeted them like a ghostly embrace. Rows of shelves crammed with yellowed manuscripts and faded tomes loomed over them. Mark led the way, his heart racing with anticipation. "Let's split up and see what we can find," he suggested, his voice almost a whisper. As they combed through the archives, Sarah leafed through a stack of brittle newspapers. "Look at this," she called, her voice tinged with excitement. "This article talks about the disappearances. It mentions a gathering that happened over a century ago." She pointed to a faded photograph accompanying the article, the same faceless group that had haunted Mark's dreams. Do you think there's a connection? Lily asked, biting her lip nervously. Definitely, Mark replied, his focus unwavering. He scanned the shelves, moving deeper into the archives. Suddenly, he noticed a diary tucked away at the back of a shelf, its cover cracked and worn. The title was barely legible, but he could make out the name, Evelyn Hawthorne. "Guys, come here," Mark shouted, excitement bubbling in his chest. The others hurried over, their curiosity piqued. "Whose diary is it?" Jake asked, peering over Mark's shoulder. Evelyn was one of the faceless individuals, Mark explained, flipping through the pages. This could tell us what happened. As he read aloud, the room seemed to grow colder. The words described a sinister ritual held under the light of a full moon, a desperate attempt to gain power and escape the village's curse. They believed that by performing certain rites, they could free themselves, Mark said, his voice trembling. But it looks like it went horribly wrong. Suddenly, the sky outside darkened, and a crack of lightning illuminated the room. The storm had arrived with a vengeance, rain pounding against the windows. "We should head back," Jake urged, glancing nervously at the door. "Not yet," Mark insisted, his fingers still tracing the words in the diary. "We're so close to understanding this. We can't leave now." Without warning, a low whisper echoed through the archives, sending chills down their spines. "Did you hear that?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide with fear. "It's just the wind," Mark replied, though he felt a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. He continued reading, his voice rising above the growing storm outside. They mentioned something about a sacrifice, something they had to give to complete the ritual. "What kind of sacrifice?" Lily questioned, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark's heart raced as he turned the page, revealing a sketch of the faceless group. "It doesn't say," he replied, unease creeping into his words. "But it sounds like they were trapped by their own actions. This could be why they disappeared." Another thunderclap roared, rattling the building. The lights flickered ominously and the whispers grew louder, echoing off the walls. "We need to get out of here," Jake shouted, panic rising in his voice. "Not until we find out more," Mark insisted, his obsession with the mystery overpowering his sense of fear. "Mark, this isn't just a story anymore," Sarah pleaded, her face pale. "Something is wrong here. We're not alone." Just then, a sudden gust of wind swept through the archives, slamming a door shut behind them. The sound reverberated ominously, making them jump. "What was that?" Lily gasped, her eyes darting around the dimly lit room. "Stay close," Mark said, his voice steady but his heart racing. "We can't let fear control us. We're going to uncover the truth." As the storm raged outside, the friends huddled together, the sense of being watched intensifying. The air thickened with dread, and the whispers, now clearer, seemed to beckon them closer. "You're not alone," they seemed to chant, a chilling refrain that echoed in their minds. "Let's just find what we need and go," Jake said, his voice strained. "This is getting too creepy." Mark nodded, but his resolve was firm. The mystery of the photograph had become more than a mere curiosity. It was a dark puzzle begging to be solved. They had to uncover the horrors of the past before they could truly escape the village's grasp. The crackling fire cast flickering shadows across the faces of Mark, Sarah, Jake, and Lily as they settled around the campfire, the chill of the evening air creeping into their bones. The tension hung thick, an unspoken weight settling over them. Mark, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling mix of excitement and dread, held the diary he had found in the archives, its worn pages trembling slightly in his hands. "Listen to this," Mark said, his voice low and intense, drawing the others' attention. "The diary mentions a curse tied to the photograph. It says that anyone who gazes upon it becomes part of its story, doomed to repeat the fate of those who vanished over a century ago." Sarah shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her shoulders. "You can't be serious. That's just folklore, right? Old wives' tales to scare children?" "No," Mark insisted, a fervor in his tone. "This is different. The villagers aren't just wary, they're terrified. There's something about that photograph that binds us to the past. We need to understand it if we want to survive." Jake, always the skeptic, rolled his eyes. "So what? We're supposed to just sit here and wait for something to happen?" I say we pack our bags and get out of this creepy place before we end up like them." Lily, however, appeared lost in thought, her gaze fixed on the flames. "What if Mark is right?" she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if there's more to this? It would explain the strange dreams, the voices." "Voices," Jake interrupted, his brows furrowing in concern. "What voices?" "Last night, when I was trying to sleep," Lily continued, her voice trembling as she recalled the memory. "I thought I heard someone calling my name. It was faint, but it felt so real." "See? That's exactly what I'm talking about," Mark exclaimed, his excitement palpable. "There's definitely something supernatural happening here. We can't just ignore it." As they argued, the fire crackled and popped, sending sparks dancing into the night sky. The atmosphere shifted, a heavy silence enveloping them as the shadows seemed to stretch and twist. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the campsite, causing the flames to flicker violently. "Did you feel that?" Sarah asked, her voice shaky. "It's like the air changed." Before anyone could respond, a soft voice echoed through the trees, barely audible but unmistakably calling, "Lily." The group turned in unison, eyes wide with fear. "Did you hear that?" Jake whispered, his bravado evaporating. Lily stood abruptly, her expression a mix of curiosity and something darker. I think it's calling me," she said, stepping away from the fire, entranced. "Lily, wait!" Mark shouted, panic rising in his chest. But she didn't respond. She continued walking, drawn toward the darkness beyond the flickering light. "Stop her!" Sarah cried, her voice rising with urgency. Mark sprang to his feet, dashing after Lily, the others quickly following. "Lily!" he yelled, reaching for her arm as she moved deeper into the woods. "Snap out of it!" But Lily seemed lost, her eyes glazed over as she walked further away, the voice beckoning her like a siren's call. "Lily, please, come back," Sarah pleaded, her heart racing as she watched her friend disappear into the shadows. Finally, Mark managed to grab hold of her shoulder, shaking her gently. "Lily, it's us. Come back." With a sudden jolt, Lily blinked rapidly, as if waking from a dream. What happened?" she stammered, confusion clouding her features. "You were just gone," Jake said, his voice a mix of relief and fear. "You were walking away like you were in a trance." "I don't remember anything," Lily said, her voice trembling. "One moment I was here, and the next, I heard a voice calling me. I felt drawn to it." Mark's heart sank as he exchanged worried glances with the others. The weight of the photograph's curse loomed larger than ever in their minds. "We need to figure out what's happening. This isn't just some spooky story anymore. It's real, and it's dangerous." As they gathered close to the fire again, the warm glow felt fragile, a thin barrier against the darkness that surrounded them. The feeling of being watched returned, a chill creeping up Mark's spine. He glanced at the photograph, tucked away in his bag, the faces of the faceless figures haunting him even from their resting place. "Let's just stay together," Sarah said, her voice steadier now, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her fear. "We'll figure this out in the morning." Mark nodded, but the unease gnawed at him. As the fire crackled and the night deepened, he couldn't shake the feeling that they had crossed a line, that whatever was lurking in the shadows was waiting for them to make the next move. And as the whispers floated through the trees, echoing the names of those long gone, he couldn't help but wonder if they were already too late. As the sun dipped behind the gnarled trees, casting elongated shadows across the forest floor, Mark stood at the edge of a clearing, clutching the diary tightly in his hand. The air was thick with tension as his friends, Sarah, Jake, and Lily, gathered around him, their faces etched with apprehension. The flickering light from the lantern they had brought illuminated the pages, revealing cryptic instructions for the ritual they hoped would break the curse afflicting them. "We have to do this," Mark declared, determination etched in his features. "If the diary is right, this is the only way to stop whatever is haunting us." Jake shifted uneasily, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting to see the faceless figures lurking just beyond the tree line. "I don't know, Mark. This feels wrong. We should just leave. Whatever's out there isn't going to let us go easily." "Are you really willing to run away from this?" Mark shot back, frustration bubbling beneath his calm exterior. "We've already lost so much time." Lily was almost taken last night. We can't let fear dictate our actions. Lily, still shaken from her previous encounter, nodded slowly. But what if the ritual does more harm than good? What if it makes things worse? Then we'll deal with it together, Mark reassured her, though his voice wavered slightly. He cast a glance at Sarah, who had remained silent, her brow furrowed in thought. You believe in this, right? Sarah sighed, her voice barely above a whisper. I want to believe we can end this, but I'm scared, Mark. What if we're just feeding whatever darkness is in this place? Mark took a deep breath, feeling the weight of their predicament. We don't have a choice. We need to confront this darkness, or it will consume us one by one, trust me. Reluctantly, the others nodded, and they began to position themselves in a circle, following the instructions laid out in the diary. As they recited the incantation, a chill swept through the clearing, rustling the leaves with an unnatural energy. Mark could feel the air thickening, almost vibrating with tension as shadows seemed to stretch toward them. Do you feel that? Jake whispered, eyes darting around the darkening woods. It's like something is watching us. Focus, Jake, Mark urged, trying to maintain control over the situation. We have to keep going. We're almost there. As they continued, the whispers mentioned in the diary began to echo through the clearing, growing louder, sharper. They were indistinct at first, mere murmurs, but as they pressed on, the voices coalesced into a cacophony, a symphony of despair that gnawed at their sanity. Suddenly, Sarah screamed, her eyes wide with terror. Look! She pointed toward the edge of the clearing, where shadowy figures began to materialize, their faceless forms drifting closer, moving with an eerie grace. They're back! Mark's heart raced as he tried to keep the group focused. It's just an illusion. We have to finish the ritual. But even he could feel the oppressive weight of dread creeping into his mind, attempting to shatter their resolve. One by one, the friends began to see visions of their past, twisted and distorted. Jake saw himself as a child, playing in the woods, laughter ringing out before it was replaced with the chilling silence of abandonment. Lily's vision was darker, a glimpse of her future where she stood alone, surrounded by faceless specters. Mark, I can't do this, Jake shouted, his voice cracking with fear. We have to go, now. Just a little longer, Mark insisted, desperation creeping into his tone. We're almost there. But it was too late. As they struggled to maintain their focus, the whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar, drowning out Mark's pleas. The faceless figures closed in, and one by one, his friends began to lose their grip on reality, their eyes glazing over as they succumbed to the visions and the darkness that surrounded them. Mark! Sarah's voice was a mere whisper now, panic and despair etched on her face. Help us! Mark felt the ground beneath him tremble as he desperately clutched the diary, the words blurring before his eyes. No amount of determination could drown out the chilling realization that their fate was intertwined with the very darkness they sought to escape. As his friends began to fade one by one into the shadows, he stood frozen, helpless against the malevolent force that had ensnared them all. The wind howled through the trees as Mark and his friends stood in the clearing, the remnants of the ritual still swirling in the air. The echoes of their chanting faded, replaced by an unsettling silence that seemed to stretch endlessly. Mark's heart raced as he scanned the shadows, a nagging feeling tugging at his mind. Did we really do it? He murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, man. It feels wrong, Jake replied, his brow furrowed with worry. He shifted nervously, glancing back toward the woods where the shadows seemed to writhe and pulse. We should have left when I said we should. Don't start this again, Sarah interjected, her eyes scanning the darkening forest. We need to stick together. We can't let whatever is out there break us apart. Just then, Mark noticed something in the corner of his eye. A fleeting movement, a figure cloaked in darkness. He squinted, trying to focus, but it slipped away before he could make out any details. Did you see that? He asked, his heart pounding louder now. See what? Lily asked, her voice shaky. What are you talking about? There was someone, a figure. It looked familiar. Mark's gut twisted as he realized the figure bore an uncanny resemblance to the faceless individuals in the photograph. I have to check it out. No, Mark, Jake exclaimed, stepping forward. We can't split up. That's exactly what they want. Mark felt a surge of defiance. I need to know. It's tied to the photograph. I can feel it. He took a step toward the shadows, compelled by a force he didn't understand. Wait, Mark, don't, Sarah called out. But he was already moving, driven by an insatiable curiosity that overshadowed his fear. As he ventured deeper into the woods, the air thickened, and the whispers returned, wrapping around him like a shroud. They grew louder, chanting a name he could not quite grasp. Suddenly, he stopped dead in his tracks. A realization struck him like a lightning bolt. I'm a descendant, he gasped, the horror of his discovery crashing over him. The stories he had heard, the tales of lost bloodlines and unbroken curses, flooded his mind. The curse was never meant to be broken. Mark! Jake shouted from behind him, his voice tinged with panic. Come back! But Mark couldn't move. He felt a strange connection to the figure that lingered just out of sight, a bond forged through blood. The shadow shifted and he saw it again. An outline, a face that was almost familiar yet unnervingly blank. He stumbled backward, realization dawning as he muttered, It's me. It's my bloodline. Mark, please. Sarah's voice broke through his haze, pulling him back to the present. We need you. But as he turned to face his friends, he saw something far more chilling. Jake's eyes widened in terror, and Lily stood frozen, her face pale as she stared into the shadows. One by one, they began to vanish, their forms dissolving like mist in the morning sun. Mark! Jake's voice echoed, desperate and filled with fear. Help us! Panic surged through Mark as he reached for them, but it was too late. The darkness enveloped his friends, pulling them into an abyss of shadows, their screams swallowed by the night. No, this can't be happening, Mark cried, feeling helpless as he watched them disappear before his eyes. Run, Mark, save yourself. Sarah's voice was the last thing he heard as she too was consumed by the darkness. Tears streamed down his face as he fell to his knees, realizing the horrifying truth. He had unwittingly sacrificed his friends to save himself from a fate he had long been cursed to repeat. Alone in the woods, Mark felt the weight of his lineage pressing down on him, a burden he could never escape. The shadows whispered his name, welcoming him into their fold. He was now bound to Raven's End, a prisoner of the very curse he sought to unravel. As the last glimmers of his friends faded into the night, he understood that he was trapped in an endless cycle, forever haunted by their absence and the sinister legacy that bound him to this cursed place.